honored guests, thank you for coming to this assembly. If you'll please take a seat, our meeting will start presently. Gentlemen, you have the floor.
Hey Ryan, question for you.
What's that?
Yeah. If you could have any Guinness World Record, what would it be and why?
Ooh, any Guinness World Record. So, I mean, I could be known for eating all the hot dogs. That's the typical one. I could be known for having the biggest bug collection in the world. Just some off the top of my head, but actually, I think I have a pretty good answer for this one.
Okay.
If I had to have any Guinness World Record, I think it would be the the guy who fell from the highest distance without dying.
Okay.
And
And why that record?
because I didn't die. so so like it would be the ultimate one up in like a dinner conversation. Like oh man, I went on a roller coaster. I went to like Six Flags, or I went to Cedar Point, and I went down those big roller coasters. That was crazy. It was so high. It's like, psh, that's nothing. I fell from the stratosphere and I didn't die. Record scratch. Everybody's just like, I'm sorry, what? And then immediately you're the cool guy at the table.
Ryan, you're already the cool guy at the table.
Oh wow, he's just
Yeah.
say that after our debate after this episode. So
Yeah, I'll take all those words back.
mm-hmm.
Um, so as far as my response, I think, and I have not given it very much thought, but the first record that comes to mind is the um, like Guinness World Records are a little bit odd.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Oh
you
yeah,
you want like there's a little bit like a weird kind of a vibe to them.
like the lady with the piercings in her face.
Yeah,
Just the billion of them.
exactly. So if I could have like any world record like that, I think I would want like most marathons completed in like the shortest amount of time.
Ah,
I,
see, that one's actually useful.
yeah, well, again,
Kind of.
it's not super useful, but again, it's just kind of like that dinner table like conversation, like, hey, I'm a better runner than you are, basically. Because I'm right now I'm in the process of training for a half marathon, and so
mm-hmm.
it's very like a lot of my time is spent thinking about running, and so I think like if I had a running specifically like a marathon world record, that would be cool. Otherwise, like longest fingernails, is
Oh,
gross and disgusting,
it's
but
horrible.
if I could just have that and like not have to put in the work, like if I could just wake up one day and just like have it and then immediately trim them, that'd be cool.
Yeah, yeah. See, that's what I was thinking. Is like I wouldn't actually have to do any work to fall from a great height, and I survived. Plus, I get recognition for my record. So, that's what I was thinking. The best of both worlds there. You would
Okay.
actually have to run your marathons. So, good luck with that.
Yeah. I don't think it's anytime soon I'm going to be breaking that one.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Assemblymen, where it's okay to ask for directions. Here at the Assembly, our purpose is personal development, and each week our goal is to highlight one virtue of outstanding individuals for us to cultivate in our own lives. This week, that virtue, and what we would call our theme, is self discipline.
Today's theme.
So, Daniel, if I say self discipline, what do you think of?
I think of all of the montages from the Rocky and Karate Kid movies.
Oh, man, that's probably the most solid answer you could have given. That's
Uh,
so good.
yeah,
You just
'cause
hear the music.
just the training montages where they're like Rocky 4, where he's like running up the mountains in Russia
Mhm.
and like just like
Beating up the
lifting
meat.
heavy things. Yeah. Or like the Karate Kid, where he's like waxing on and waxing off. That's what I think of when I think
Mhm.
self discipline. What
It-
about you, Ryan?
Solid answer. When I think self discipline, I think of not being allowed to touch the ice cream in the freezer, and it makes me sad. I think of like diets and going on like fasting and things of that nature. Is it concerning that it's always back to food? I don't know. Let's just keep moving. So I looked it up, and there's a couple definitions for self-discipline that you can find in Webster's dictionary, but there's two specifically that I want to point out for today. So the first one is actually 1B of Webster's dictionary, which is self-discipline, orderly or prescribed conduct or pattern of behavior. It's fairly self-explanatory. So just a pattern of behavior that you get in. Number 3, though, on the list that I saw was training that corrects, molds, or perfects the mental faculties or moral character. And that seemed more like what we're going to be talking about today. Because in order for us to cultivate this virtue of self-discipline in our lives, it's very helpful to have an example to look at. And so for our assemblymen today, I have for us our look at this guy.
Look at this guy.
Today's Look at This Guy segment, we will be taking a walk back through history. Quite a ways, actually, a couple hundred years, back to the early 1800s, where we find one Fredrick Douglass. Born in the early 1800s, Fredrick Douglass, he was also known as Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey.
That's a heck of a name.
Oh yeah, he was collecting them like Pokemon cards. Yeah, he was separated from his mother. Unfortunately, it was a typical practice to separate slaves from their family back in those days. He was only visited by his grandma a couple times before she died, and so basically he had like no family by the time he was 12. When he was 12 years old, though, his slave owner's wife kind of felt sorry for him in a way, like had a sort of pity for him, and so she decided that she was going to teach him the alphabet. So
Okay.
she taught him the basics of words. Well, not even words, just like what the alphabet is. And also she was a religious woman, so she read to him out of the Bible, and through his interaction with the alphabet and the Bible, he started to pick up on how to read. When Sophia, the woman's name is Sophia, when her husband found out that his slave was learning how to read, he had a fit, and he put a stop to it. And it was like, that is not happening in my house. You are not going to do that. And so she, compelled by her husband, decided, I'm not going to do that anymore. And so she hid things like newspapers and her Bible for him not to be able to have those resources to read anymore. Super unfortunate.
Yeah, because the thought basically would be like slaves aren't people. And
Right.
So there's no reason for them to be educated or to know how to read or even basic stuff like that.
Right. And it's such an unfortunate thing, you know. Reading about some of this is really hard. But that did not deter our good friend Fredrick Douglass here. Even though his reading materials had been taken from him, he decided, you know what? I want to learn how to read. So he did. He taught himself how to read. In his autobiography, Douglass related how he learned to read from the white children in the neighborhood and by observing the writings of the men with whom he worked.
That is crazy.
Yeah, so he just like watched people and learned how to do it. He had the basics of like the alphabet and a little bit under his belt, but the rest of the English language when it comes to reading and writing, he just kind of taught himself how to do it.
That's ridiculous.
Right, exactly. It's crazy. And he continued secretly to teach himself how to read and to write, and he later said, "Knowledge is the pathway from slavery to freedom." Well, in 1830, about 13 years after he was born, so maybe a year later after he started to learn the alphabet, he had enough money that he had saved up from doing odd jobs that he bought a copy of this thing called the Columbian Orator. It was a collection of writings that was compiled by Caleb Brigham, an anti-slavery teacher who was determined to democratize education and instill in young people the heritage of the American Revolution. He wanted to give it to everybody. He's like, everybody should have the chance to learn. And so knowing this, Fredrick Douglass bought a copy of it and decided, I'm going to become as learned as I possibly can and stand my ground when it comes to why I believe that slavery is wrong. Because the Columbian Order contributed a lot to his beginnings of the logic behind his arguments on like slavery is wrong and here's why.
Sure.
So this was one of his most prized possessions because it was one of his only possessions until he gained his freedom. Fast forwarding several years and a lot of history, and I feel bad for doing this, but y'all, if you're listening, you need to go research Fredrick Douglass and the history behind it. He's got 3 different autobiographies I'll give you at the end of this. Anyway, fast forwarding a long time. We look at Fredrick Douglass, and he has this quote: "Self-made men are those who, in a world of schools, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Self-made men are those who, in a world of schools, academies, colleges, and other institutions of learning, are often compelled by unfriendly circumstances to acquire their education elsewhere, and amidst unfavorable conditions, to hew out for themselves a way to success, and thus to become the architects of their own good fortunes." So he didn't believe in just sitting down and letting life happen to you. He said, look, if you want things to change, you need to go make a difference. And if people are going to stop your education, then you go out and you find a way to make it happen.
Right.
Which
so
he
rather than complain about, oh, I'm not being taught anything, he just learned stuff.
Yeah, exactly. He's just like, whatever. And so then after still in slavery, this is before he was free. Still in slavery, he actually taught for 6 months a Bible study at this location he was at to about 40 different slaves, taught them how to read the New Testament and how to write, taught them how to teach others. And this was going on for about 6 months unchecked behind the backs of the slave owners until they put an abrupt stop to it after they found out. But the
Nice.
quote unquote damage had already been done, and he was laying the groundwork for what he would be doing here in the future. So now Fredrick Douglass escapes. He's free. But he's drawing a lot of public attention to himself because he's an outspoken abolitionist. And a bunch of people who knew him and were his supporters said, you need to get out of here. So he goes to Ireland to escape those who would try to drag him back into slavery. Throughout his time in Ireland and Europe, he actually was, by his supporters, got enough money to like buy his freedom, essentially. But over there, he experienced freedom like he had never experienced it before, and he was an equal to the people around him, which he writes about in some of his autobiographies. But he still came back, and that's what really got me, is that like he decided to come back home because there was stuff to do here to fight for his brothers and sisters who were still in slavery. So he gave up his, I know, right? Like he gave up his chance of freedom. He was there. Like he was in a place that he didn't have to come back, but he did anyway. And he got involved in many different parts of politics, and started like newspapers and all sorts of stuff to get the word out. Like, this is not right. We need to end this horrible institution of slavery. And in one of his speeches, he said this: "I have nothing to commend me to your consideration in the way of learning," he told an English audience in 1846. "Nothing in the way of education to entitle me to your attention, and you're aware that slavery is a very bad school for rearing teachers of morality and religion. The slave is deprived of education. God has given him an intellect. The slaveholder declares it shall not be cultivated." He also said this: "I remember well when my mistress first announced to my master that she had discovered that I could read. His face colored, his face colored at once with surprise and chagrin. He said that I was ruined and my value as a slave destroyed. That a slave should know nothing but to obey his master. That to give someone as himself an inch would lead him to take an L or like a mile.
Yeah.
That having learned how to read, I would soon want to know how to write, and that by and by I would be running away. And then he said, I think my audience will bear witness to the correctness of this philosophy and to the literal fulfillment of this prophecy, which I found hilarious.
That's awesome.
But he's an example of self-discipline in that, like, to learn to read and to write is already hard enough. We have people in schools who, you know, are having trouble with that, but to do it yourself, to have the gumption and the gall saying, like, I'm going to learn because I think there's something more to this world, and I'm going to do it no matter what you say. Like, he was determined, and he had the discipline to do that, and then to have the discipline to say, I've experienced freedom, and I'm coming back into the mire, into the grime and grossness to fight on behalf of what I believe in. That's crazy.
Yeah, I like that it starts out as, yeah, I want to learn something. There's something more that I want to gain, but then I want others to experience that too.
Yes.
And I'm not just going to wait for someone else to give that to them. I'm going to bring that to them.
Right.
Like, I'm going to be the person who is in charge of that. That's awesome.
So he has three different autobiographies if you're interested in looking him up. One of them is called My Bondage and My Freedom. Another is Narrative of the Life of Fredrick Douglass. And the third one is Life and Times of Fredrick Douglass. And now a brief recess.
Dad Joke Corner.
So Ryan, with the quarantine going on, I don't have a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
The only thing I have planned for today is to go get my new glasses.
Oh.
Then I'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, when the grocery store clerk asks me if I want the milk in a bag, I always tell him, no, I'd rather drink it out of the carton.
This has been Dad Joke Corner.
Preparing you for the future.
All right. So, in addition to the character studies that we do here with our Look at This Guy segments, we also like to give solid advice, just solid, trustworthy, worthwhile advice that you can listen to and trust absolutely with that. And so we have another segment of guidance counselors.
Guidance counselors.
So this week, we, in relating to the theme of self-discipline, we have a question from our audience here. It says, hello, guidance counselors. Do you have any tips for impulse control? I seem to struggle with bad habits, and a lot of the time I respond by immediately giving in and doing what I know I shouldn't do. Just wondered what you guys do to replace those negative behaviors with something healthier. Thanks. And that is a common question.
Oh, man. It's
Ryan.
so... Yes, it is a common question.
Like, the whole, I think, like, self-help book genre is based on how do you not do what you shouldn't do, and how do you do what you should do?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's hard a lot of the time.
It's a lot easier to read those books, though, and feel good about yourself than actually doing things. So
true. So, yeah, we're not here to give you self-help, like, pat on the back advice. This is practical, real advice that you can really use.
Drop down, give me 20 right now. $20. $20. No, I do have an answer for this, though.
Yeah, go for it.
So when it comes to impulse control, one of the best things, in my opinion, is that let's go back to the beginning of the episodes and say there's ice cream in the freezer, right? It's a lot easier to have impulse control when there's not ice cream in the freezer.
So true.
So that's why I eat it all, so that way I don't have to.
No, Ryan, no. This is bad advice now. Stop.
So that way it doesn't tempt me anymore.
No, Ryan, no.
You were doing so well.
No, Ryan is 100% correct with the first half of that. It is harder to be tempted to eat ice cream if there's no ice cream in the freezer. Like that is why, like I used to work at a grocery store, and the rule was you never go to the grocery store hungry, because everything looks good if you're hungry, right? And you're going to make poor decisions with what you buy and what you eat if you're hungry. If you're putting yourself in a situation where you're going to be tempted to do that.
Yeah. So stop putting yourself in situations that you know are going to cause this impulse to happen. Like it's pretty simple.
And it doesn't matter what that impulse is. Like it could be literally anything. But as soon as you figure out, like, okay, here's a situation where I'm usually tempted to do this, or where I have this impulse a lot, stop putting yourself in that situation.
But then there's the other side of it, though, where it's like, well, I can't not. I have to be in this situation. Whatever situation that might be, I'm sure some people would be thinking that. There is a response to that too. And this one, like, if you want to go about this, it's going to require some work on your part. So, just letting you know out the bat. But like,
you're going to have to be self-disciplined.
There you go. Exactly. To cultivate self-discipline, one of the things you have to do is you have to have like some introspection. One of the best things to do when you're experiencing those impulses, those temptations, whatever you call it, or whatever you want to call it, you need to figure out when those most often happen. So like, is it when you're feeling lonely, or when you're feeling like stressed or upset? Like what is causing that, or at least what is what do they call it nowadays, a trigger of those things to happen for you in your life? Because if you're not actually taking time to have some introspection, figure out when those things are happening, it's just gonna be like you're gonna do it again, and you'll be like, oh, I just can't stop, this is just who I am now. Instead of saying, you know what, I do those things a lot when I feel like, I feel lonely, and it's like, maybe I need to deal with that first, because there's other things that are behind the behaviors that we do, that we mask with those behaviors, and we don't actually deal with the root cause. So maybe there's some stuff like, maybe it needs to be to a point where it's like, hey, I need some actual help with this from somebody. I need to talk to somebody, and maybe not like it could go to a counselor, but like even just a friend, and be like, hey, you made me feel bad, and I think we should talk about this rather than me going home and eating all the ice cream in the fridge.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I think just getting another person involved is, just like Ryan said, that's huge. Even if it's, a friend, the theme for this podcast is it's okay to ask for directions.
Exactly.
Right. There's nothing wrong with asking for help if you're in a spot where you need help.
It's called accountability.
Yeah, 100%. And that is, in my life, that has been kind of the number one thing that has helped me with some of the impulse control, is having someone else that I can share those feelings with, that I can talk through it, and who's going to, follow up with me and be like, hey, how are you doing? How are these things going?
Actually, as an example, Fredrick Douglass, he was a preacher, and he had a church and another pastor friend that was kind of a relationship that they had, in that like they spurred each other on in what they were doing. It wasn't just alone. Like, I know I use the phrase self-made man, but like, it's not just, you're not an island. There are other people around you. There's a support group. There's people that care about you.
Definitely. So use those resources, and that is good advice.
All right, next on the docket, we have an important discussion. This is one of our
debates from the annals of history.
All right, today's debate, hotly debated topic amongst the Assemblymen. We need to figure out and come to a consensus here, Daniel. And we need to figure out, what is the color of nothing?
That's a great question, Ryan. I'm curious, what do you think? What wrong color do you think nothing is?
Man, already with the attacks here. All right. So the color of nothing is black. Nothing is black. Because
a lot of things are black, Ryan.
Right, but that's because they're lacking in color. Like, I know if you're listening, you can't see this, but there is a bookshelf behind me that it is black, but all of the books on there are of many different colors, reds and blues and greens. Those have color, but the black doesn't. Black is an absence of color, at least in the light spectrum. I shouldn't say that as like the color of crayon. I need to specify this. A color of crayon, that actually is like, that is a color. But when we're talking light spectrum, black is the absence of those colors.
That's interesting that you say that, Ryan, because if I take all of my colors of paints and I pour them onto a canvas, pretty sure it turns out black.
I think it's just brown. I think you're colorblind.
Pretty sure it makes black.
I think you're colorblind.
Because black is, I mean, it's nice to say, yeah, like space is black, it's the void, it's the absence of color. But in the real world, when you're doing art or when you're making things, black is a hyper saturation of pigment. Like, it is so much that it is therefore, it's everything in that sense. So
yeah.
Nothing is much closer to white. Like the white, when you think of like the white void of like anytime thought or like the mind is depicted in like movies or in visual mediums, it's always white, because it's this bright possibility where the blank canvas where nothing has happened is always white. And that's why I think nothing is white.
But white is all of the color spectrum put together in the light spectrum, and our job is to parse between those colors and create something out of it. It's not nothing, it's everything. And then we take from that everything and we make things out of it, like art. You can't take those things out of like black. You can't do that. It's nothing.
Sure you can, because once again, if I take all of my paint colors and I pour them onto a canvas, it's not white. I guarantee it's not white, Ryan.
Then you've ruined the canvas and you've created nothing. You have nothing. You lose. No fizzy lifting drinks.
And then I added paint to it, and then I came up with black. So black is a lot of things.
Okay, I think we're arguing like the same thing, but for the different colors. I had an answer that I had forgotten, and I want to bring it to your attention now.
Okay, yes.
I think nothing is clear.
Okay,
it could be black, it could be clear. So, like, let me explain why. It could be one of the other. Because light or color is determined by our own brains. The light goes into our eyeballs, goes into the brain, gets processed, comes back out, and so the light is processed by our brains, and then that's the color it is. If we're talking about nothing, like there's literally nothing to look at, then there's nothing for the light to refract off of back into our eyeballs and to actually tell us what color it is. So it could, like, I don't know what would happen scientifically with your eyeball there, but I think it would either be like this really weird situation where it's just clear forever, or because there's no light, you would just see black. And so like my experience in my own brain would just be darkness. So that's why I say it's black.
And I say you have never painted. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what we think. It doesn't matter what Daniel says. It doesn't matter what Ryan says. It matters what our audience says. In the future, we are looking to have guest judges for this segment and others to help decide our great debates, as well as the other competitions we have planned. So if you listening to this are interested in being featured on a future segment, send us an email with the subject line guest judge, and we will try to coordinate an appearance.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Assemblymen podcast. You can find our episodes on YouTube, Podbean, and SoundCloud. Just search the Assemblymen podcast. If you have any feedback, topics, or whatever you'd like to discuss with us, or questions you'd like us to answer, please email us at theassemblymenpodcast@gmail.com, or connect with us on Facebook. Our page on Facebook is facebook.com/theassemblymenpod. We'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation.
Also, if you like what you heard and believe in what we're doing, please leave us a rating or review in your podcast platform of choice. And if you know anyone else who might enjoy listening, feel free to share us with a friend. That really helps us grow our audience and means we get to welcome even more awesome people into the assembly.
All right, so Daniel, what did we learn today?
Well, we learned a lot of things today, Ryan. First of all, we learned that Fredrick Douglass, pretty awesome dude.
Oh yeah.
And everyone should do some more research on that,
Mm-hmm.
because the little snippet that we include in this episode is not nearly a comprehensive look at his life, and there's a lot more really awesome stuff.
That goes without saying.
We also learned that Ryan doesn't know how to paint things.
I think you're probably right about that. I'm not an artist. But I learned something today. I learned that Dan is in such good shape because he's ran more marathons than the rest of the entire world, and I wish to have the physique that he does.
That is the dream, isn't it?
But unfortunately, I eat all of the ice cream in the freezer. So, thank you all so much for listening. We appreciate all of you, and we'd love to hear from you, like we said.
And until next time, meeting adjourned.